In this video, we'll be looking at a number of social sharing platforms. We'll look at text sharing, audio sharing, photo sharing, slide sharing, video sharing, and finally, multimedia sharing. If only one or a few of these are of interest to you, feel free to fast forward to the appropriate section or sections. I'm Mark Pegram, and I'll be taking you through this material. Here's the usual copyright notice that you see at the start of each online video. As we read in this quote from a recent article, there are many advantages to students creating and sharing multimedia materials. This parallels the change that we've seen on the wider internet. That is, a change from expert-generated content to user-generated content. In the process of creating multimedia artifacts, students are able to access new ways of engaging with the curriculum and also with their peers. Not only are there direct benefits for students learning, but they're also becoming expert communicators in the process. They're learning to use the communication tools and new media of our age. That is, the tools and media that they will be using in their personal and social lives, but also in their professional lives in the future. Beyond the pedagogical advantages, there are also some practical technological advantages. When we store multimedia artifacts on social sharing sites, we're not using up storage space on our own sites or platforms. We can easily embed stored artifacts in our own sites or platforms, and we have access to varied multimedia presentation formats. Of course, this is true for us as educators, and it's also true for our students when it comes time for them to share the multimedia artifacts they've created. Let's begin with text sharing. All of the major services for creating websites or blogs or wikis will allow you to very easily input text. But sometimes there might be times when you want to store documents elsewhere and embed them in a website or a blog or a wiki that you're creating. There are a number of general text sharing services which will store your documents and allow you to easily embed them elsewhere. Here's an example of a document embedded in an e-portfolio by a pre-service teacher using Scribd. Note, however, that Scribd was formerly free, but is now a paid service. Similarly, here is another pre-service teacher using a different service, Box, to embed a document in a page of an e-portfolio. Again, like Scribd, Box is now a paid service. Going beyond document sharing services, there are also ebooks. Of course, it's possible to purchase existing ebooks as well as creating your own. When it comes to ebooks that have been created by others and that you can purchase or download from the internet, there's actually a pretty fine line between ebooks and apps. What you're looking at here is one of the first ebooks which was produced in an app format. It's effectively an interactive ebook. If you'd like to watch a short video about it, you might like to pause this video and go to the address at the bottom of the screen. You might also like to take a look at some apps which have a lot in common with ebooks, often with gamification elements built in. Stride and Prejudice contains the text of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. You have a character of Elizabeth Bennet, and you have to help her run along the sentences and jump over the gaps between them. If you miss, you get a game over sign with a nice Jane Austen quote. So this is essentially a speed reading app. In device 6, a story meets a game. As the central character moves around a building, every time she changes direction, the text changes direction. At various points, the reader is given choices to make, and those choices then affect the evolution of the story. And Typewriter is an interesting game that teaches students about the history of typography. Even with ebooks which have a more traditional format, there's often quite a lot of interaction and collaboration that's possible. If you use a Kindle device or the Kindle app, you can see, for example, how many other readers have highlighted a certain section of text. So when you're reading, you always have a sense that you're not reading alone. Sometimes with Kindle, you'll have the option to share sections of text on Twitter or on Facebook. Of even more interest are a new generation of educational publishers creating ebooks or apps, depending on how you view them, which can be collaborated on and annotated by teachers and students in a class. So here you can see an extract from a biology book where the reader has highlighted a section of text and added a note. This kind of highlighting and annotation can be seen by other members of the group. On this screen, you can see a comment which has been posted by the instructor, and it's visible to all of the members of the class. In the same way, students can post questions or comments of their own, which can also be seen by their peers as well as the instructor. So here we see very clearly that the book is a stimulus for conversation as much as it is an information transmission vehicle. As part of the move towards open educational resources, sites like CK12 allow teachers to contribute chapters or sections of textbooks in their areas of expertise, and teachers can also go there, pick from the existing chapters and sections, assemble them into their own customized books, and then present them to their students. So textbook writing in this way is becoming a very collaborative exercise. And of course, if you don't want to create your own book, you can use one of the many that have already been created by other teachers. For an overview of how the whole process works, you might like to pause this video and go and have a look at the CK12 Foundation overview at the address that you can see at the bottom of the screen. There are also commercial services which work along the same lines. With Flatworld, for example, teachers would be required to purchase sections of text, but they can still assemble those sections into a book of their choice that is customized for their students. And they can even make alterations within the sections they've chosen if they think that's appropriate. If you're interested in doing something similar on a smaller scale and selling individual documents or resources you've produced as a teacher, you might like to check out the Teachers Pay Teachers website, which has become very popular in the last few years. I've certainly had several pre-service teachers sell classroom resources they've created through this site. You're not likely to make a huge amount of money, but there is something valuable about the recognition that comes from other teachers who are prepared to pay a small amount to be able to use your materials in their classroom. It also looks great on a CV. Another text sharing alternative which has become very popular in recent years is to create what we call a flipbook. Essentially, this involves uploading a PDF document to one of the many flipbook services, such as the one that you see here called FlipSnack. Those are then turned into what resemble books to be viewed on the web, where viewers can actually literally turn the pages. This is a really nice presentation format, both for materials that teachers have created for students, but also for students' own materials. Here's an example of some student work presented in a FlipSnack flipbook and embedded in a pre-service teacher's ePortfolio. Readers can flip through the pages in order to read the text. And here's a really nice project carried out by a Hong Kong primary teacher I worked with in 2014. Her students had been studying the story of the wide-mouthed frog, and they then reenacted their own version of the story. The teacher photographed them and had them write short captions for the photos. All of this material was compiled together into a flipbook which could be shared with the parents. Here you can see another excerpt from the same flipbook. Here you can see children at work on the flipbook. Of course, they had a great deal of support from the teacher to create this book, but nevertheless, they were learning about the creation of online materials, and the teacher was able to have a conversation with them about what it means to share your own work online, who can see it, how you should present yourself, and how you might even need to protect yourself. And finally, here's a list produced by the teacher from the perspective of the students in her class, showing what was learned during this process. You might like to pause the video and read through this list. While flipbooks are a technologically simple but very effective presentation option for students' work, at the other end of the spectrum, you have technologically more complex options such as iBooks Author. I've certainly seen a number of classes of students work with iBooks Author in order to present their own work in a very sophisticated manner. Another even more recent option is to publish books using Kindle Direct Publishing. These can be accessed on Kindle devices or on the Kindle app on just about any other smart device. So that's another option for teachers and students. Let's look at a few variations on the text sharing idea. If you sign up for a free account with the Diigo service, you can also annotate web pages. You simply click on the Diigo button that you download to your browser bar. This opens up a menu where Annotate is the first option that you're given. If you click on Annotate, a submenu opens up which offers you options such as highlighting or adding notes. And here's what a web page would look like with some highlighting and some notes added. You can also share your highlighting and notes with other people if you share your account details. A bit like Diigo, Lingro is a kind of filter that you can superimpose on web pages. It allows you to then get a definition of any word that you click on, and those definitions are accompanied by audio files. This is great for language learners. Let's move on now to audio sharing, which works in very much the same way as text sharing, except that instead of documents, it's now audio files that you are storing and then later embedding in your own web spaces. Amongst all of the audio sharing services, Audioboom has proven to be the most popular with teachers. This is an example of an introduction to a teaching philosophy embedded in a pre-service teacher's e-portfolio. And here's an example of another pre-service teacher who has recorded himself getting students' attention and embedded that recording in his e-portfolio. Another option when it comes to audio recordings is to use digital storytelling websites or apps. In this example, a Perth teacher has asked her students to show their understanding of a story through Explain Everything. They have been required to create both a visual representation and to record an oral description. Now we're going to turn to photo sharing platforms. Flickr is the largest photo sharing site on the web, with more than 350 million pictures under Creative Commons licenses. These sorts of images can generally be freely reused by teachers and students for educational purposes. So let's say we've done a search on Flickr for images of animals, and we decide that we'd like to use the image of the gorilla that you can see in the top right-hand corner. By clicking on the title, we can find out more information about this image. Amongst other things, you can see the details of the Creative Commons license. In this particular case, we can reuse the photo as long as we attribute it, don't make money from it, and make it available for resharing. If you're not sure about what any of these symbols mean, you can find a fuller explanation by clicking on the text that says "Some rights reserved." Of course, you can also store your own photos on Flickr. Here's an example of exactly that. This is a wiki created by a French teacher I worked with a number of years ago. She uploaded her photos of Paris to a Flickr account and then pulled them into her wiki as a slideshow which could be viewed by her students. This, though, was going to become a more collaborative activity. She was about to take her students on a trip to Paris, and the plan was to upload some of the students' own photos to the same Flickr account so that they would eventually see her photos mixed in with their own photos in a class display. So this is a really nice example of how Flickr could be used in a collaborative way. Here's a similar example created by a Hong Kong kindergarten teacher I worked with a number of years ago. Instead of uploading her photos to Flickr, she has used Picasa, which has now become Google Photos. She has then embedded a slideshow of her photos in a Google site. Every day, she would take photos of the kindergarten children engaged in various activities. This site was available to the parents, so they could go in and see what their children had been up to, and so that they could have more informed conversations with them about what they had been learning in kindergarten. There are also a number of photo collage services which have become popular in recent years. This is a Photonia display embedded within a pre-service teacher's ePortfolio. And here's an example of an interactive display created with Syncopa and again embedded in a pre-service teacher's ePortfolio. Photosnack is another take on the idea of a collage or a slideshow. It does cycle automatically through the images, but can be manually controlled as well. It's worth mentioning that there are now some very popular photo sharing apps designed for mobile devices. Instagram is certainly the best known of these. But the photos that are posted on Instagram can also be shared on other social media platforms such as Flickr or Facebook, and indeed they're often cross-posted to these kinds of services. What about the dangers of photo sharing then? Another very popular mobile app for sharing photos and videos is Snapchat. With Snapchat, photos and videos are deleted after a short amount of time. You can probably imagine that a system like this lends itself to some very creative uses, but also to certain abuses. So one thing that we always need to bear in mind with Web 2.0 tools is that we have to balance up their advantages and their potential drawbacks. And there are some tools which may be very popular in the wider world, but which probably don't have a place in education. It's instructive to pause for a few moments and to think about where the majority of images are being exchanged nowadays. Of course, there are very large photo sharing sites out there, and we've talked in some detail about Flickr. But as you can see in this chart here, many of the world's photos are being exchanged on services like Snapchat, Facebook Messenger, and WhatsApp. It's worth thinking about this and talking to our students about the possible dangers of the materials they are exchanging and receiving through all of these social services. Quite apart from issues connected with personal safety online, there's a whole different set of issues connected with copyright. Whenever you use images online, copyright law kicks in because you have to make a copy of those images in order to be able to use them. Copyright was first introduced in 1709 under the reign of Queen Anne in Great Britain. You can see her image here. Originally, it gave creators 14 years of protection, after which they could renew their copyright for a further 14 years. After that point, whatever they had created went into the public domain and could be used by anyone. What has happened over a number of years, particularly over the course of the 20th century and into the 21st century, is that copyright has been extended, both time-wise and into many more areas. There are many people who feel that today's copyright laws are out of control, and there are a number of battles being fought in the courts, particularly in the US, around this area. However, we don't want to be fighting those battles in our own classrooms. As a result, it's very good to know about Creative Commons licenses. These are licenses which allow creators to waive some or all of their rights. And most works which are under Creative Commons licenses can be freely reused for educational purposes. So Creative Commons is a great ally of educators, and it complements the educational exemptions that are already there in a number of legal systems. This infographic shows the way that the number of Creative Commons licensed works has increased over recent years. And this infographic shows the major kinds of Creative Commons licenses which are used. Do feel free to pause the video and have a look at the State of the Commons report for details of these licenses. To find Creative Commons materials, you could make use of the Creative Commons search service, or you could use the advanced functionality in Google. Let's have a quick look at some variations on the basic photo sharing idea. Poplet is a service which allows you to arrange photos and text in a kind of mind map format. A hugely popular service which allows you to annotate images is the German ThingLink. You can upload any image and then add hotspots. When a user hovers their mouse over one of those hotspots, an information box will pop up. It might contain text, as in this example here, where you can see information about a number of different resources used by a pre-service teacher in the classroom. This ThingLink image is embedded in the pre-service teacher's e-portfolio. Or here's a mind map of a professional learning network created by another pre-service teacher. When I hover my mouse over one of the hotspots, for example, the one next to the Pinterest symbol, I can read some information about how this pre-service teacher uses this particular service. And there's also a live link which will take me directly to Pinterest. In this case, another pre-service teacher has helped her class of primary students to annotate a map of their local area. The annotations include not only text, but images and videos as well. And here, we see it's possible to annotate and explain an image of a real-world environment using ThingLink. Let's move on now to slide sharing. The best known slide sharing service, very logically, is called SlideShare. It functions much like the other social sharing platforms that we've seen. You can find a lot of useful educational material there to use, but you can also upload your own materials, as can your students. It means that you're not storing slides on your own website or your own wiki, for example, and it means that you can easily embed your slideshows in a website, in a wiki page, in a blog, and so on. And you can then play those slideshows from within your website, your wiki, or your blog. Here's an example of a slideshow posted by a pre-service teacher to SlideShare and then embedded within their ePortfolio. By clicking on the arrows, it's possible to play this slideshow within the ePortfolio. It features examples of resources they've created for use in the classroom. SlideSnack is another alternative service for creating and embedding slideshows. This also comes from a pre-service teacher's ePortfolio. Most people are very familiar with Microsoft's PowerPoint and with Apple's Keynote, but it's worth mentioning that there are other types of presentation software, including Prezi, which has become very popular in recent years. You can handle a Prezi slideshow in the same way that we've been discussing. You can store it online and then embed it in a web page or a wiki page. In this case, you're looking at a slideshow created in Prezi about a pre-service teacher's teaching philosophy, and it's embedded in her ePortfolio. And that brings us to video sharing. There are many video sharing platforms, of which YouTube is probably the best known. But there are also a number of dedicated educational services, including TeacherTube, which, as you can read here on the screen, contains vetted videos that you might like to use with your students. The Khan Academy is also well worth checking out. It contains thousands of how-to educational videos. Nowadays, you do need to sign up to use it, but it's free to do so. For older students, the TED Talks site contains a lot of material. Talks, in fact, on every subject under the sun by many of the world's leading experts. Of course, you might also wish to share your own videos or get your students to share theirs. While it's possible to set up a private channel on YouTube or many of the other major video sharing services, you might also like to consider a service like SendVid, where everything is uploaded to a private location unless you choose to share the link. Another relatively new service which allows you to create safe video playlists for children is UKids, written with a double O. So how about the dangers of video sharing? As with photos, there are some large video sharing sites, as we've been discussing. But again, as with photos, many of the videos being circulated and exchanged nowadays are going through social platforms like Facebook or Snapchat. It's worth getting our students to think about the risks that might be attached to exchanging and receiving personal videos. There are some variations on the basic video sharing services around. The TED Ed site contains a lot of videos with different kinds of quiz questions attached to them, but you can also use the template provided to attach your own quiz questions to any video that you find on the TED site or on YouTube. Recently, many teachers have become keen on a new generation of services which allow you to annotate videos and add quiz questions. One of the most popular services, Zaption, has unfortunately closed its doors in 2016. But an alternative is PlayPosit, formerly known as EduCanon. You might like to check it out if this sort of approach is of interest to you. And so we come finally to multimedia sharing. In fact, a number of the social sharing platforms we've looked at already do have a multimedia element, but the ones we're about to consider are absolutely focused on that aspect. There are many, many different platforms here. I'm just going to show you a selection of them. If you want a more extensive list, you can go to the social sharing page of the eLanguage Resources Wiki, whose address I'll give you at the end of this presentation. Museum Box is a popular service where students can attach materials to the 6 sides of a cube, which can then be rotated to reveal those materials. Students can attach text, images, or hyperlinks, for example. The idea here is that students need to be very careful about what materials they choose to present because they are quite limited by the 6 sides of the cube. So if you like, this is an exercise in multimedia conciseness. If Museum Box seems like an interesting tool, you might like to pause this video and go and have a look at it. The link on the bottom left-hand side of the screen will take you to the service itself. The link on the bottom right-hand side will take you to the particular example that you can see on this screen. Note that nowadays Museum Box is a paid service, although there is a free trial version available. Powtoon is a service for creating animated cartoons, where you can bring together images, text, and audio. This particular Powtoon was created by a pre-service teacher reflecting on how she had spent the preceding year. For an example of another Powtoon created by a different pre-service teacher, you might like to pause the video and go to the address at the bottom of the screen. This is a Powtoon showing a range of different resources that this particular pre-service teacher had used in the classroom. EduCreations is an interesting video site where teachers have written and drawn on digital whiteboards to explain particular learning concepts. There is quite a bit of material here that you might find useful to complement your teaching and that your students might find useful in their own self-study. Show Me is a service available in both web-based and app format, which is a little like Explain Everything, which we covered earlier under audio sharing. Here, you can see an example created by a maths teacher I worked with recently in Perth. She has asked her students to create explanations of different types of equations. In each video, you can see the necessary workings unfolding, and there's also an audio description. Here, the teacher is showing the elements that you normally see on the screen when you watch a video, including some of the related videos that are suggested by the service. And as the teacher is pointing out here, it's possible to set up streams or areas for particular courses so that your students' videos can be gathered together. VoiceThread is a multimedia sharing platform which has become enormously popular in recent years. It allows users to leave audio comments on images. If that sounds to you like an interesting idea, you might like to pause this video and go to the link at the bottom of the screen, where you'll find a short video explaining exactly how VoiceThread works. Here's an example of the use of VoiceThread by a pre-service primary teacher in Perth. Her idea was to put up images of her students' artwork and then to get them to leave audio comments on each other's art. Here's a very interesting use of VoiceThread by a Singaporean teacher I worked with in late 2013. His idea was to use VoiceThread to present his students with the instructions for playing an online game about discrimination. Here, you can see a presentation of some of the instructions. Once students had completed the game, they were invited to come back to the VoiceThread presentation and answer some fairly complex questions about the game. They could respond to those questions with text, but the idea was to work eventually towards audio responses as well. The questions about the game led to broader questions about students' own society to get them reflecting on the theme of discrimination in their own everyday surroundings. Here's another hugely popular service called Glogster, or more accurately, Glogster EDU. In fact, these were originally two separate services, but they've now been combined into one. Glogster allows you to create multimedia posters, which bring together text, images, audio, and video in whatever combination you wish. Glogster is a freemium service where there is a free trial version, but where you need to pay for additional functionality. Here's an example of the use of Glogster by a primary teacher. She's embedded a Glogster poster on the page of a wiki. Her class was studying birds, and each week she embedded a different bird call. As you can see on this particular poster, by clicking on the arrow, you would be able to hear the call of the willy wagtail. Here's another use of Glogster by a primary teacher, this time to communicate some instructions, and you'll notice that this teacher has chosen to embed a video in her Glogster poster. This is a pre-service teacher who's used a Glogster poster to introduce her e-portfolio. Obviously her identity has been blurred out, but you can see that she's pulled together text, images, and also a video where she directly addresses the panel assessing her e-portfolio. And here's another Glogster poster created by a different pre-service teacher to represent her personal learning network. Here's a rather different usage of Glogster by a student on an undergraduate course in mobile learning. This student has created a Glogster poster to represent a particular learning space. There are a number of images annotated with text. And here's a different student in the same course using Glogster to represent a different learning space. Another service which can be used to create spectacular multimedia posters is Canva. You do need to sign up for this service, but it's free to use. And here's an example of a poster of an e-learning roadmap created using the Canva service by a teacher I worked with in 2015. Another popular service is Pinterest, which allows you to create multimedia pin-up boards on any subject under the sun. If this seems of interest to you, you might like to pause this video and go and have a look at Pinterest. You'll need to sign up, but it's free to do so. There are quite a lot of Pinterest boards created by educators for educators, perhaps particularly at early childhood and primary level. This is an example from one of the pre-service teachers' e-portfolios, where she has shown where she has drawn inspiration from on Pinterest, and then how that inspiration translated into actual classroom resources in her teaching. And here's another one of the pre-service teachers I worked with, showing how she shares ideas on her own Pinterest board. Finally, here's a chemistry Pinterest board created by another pre-service teacher, this time in 2016. So there are lots of social sharing platforms out there. They are about multimedia sharing, multimedia interaction, and of course, the development of multimedia literacy. On the downside, it is important to consider copyright when students are producing their own materials, and it's important to help them to understand what copyright law is and the need to use Creative Commons images, for example. There are also potentially some privacy and safety issues. These can be avoided if private channels are used in places where students might be revealing their identities, and conversely, if students' work is going out on the wider internet, it's probably best that they don't reveal their identities online. For a summary of what we've been saying about social sharing, and for links to many different social sharing platforms, please feel free to go to the social sharing page of the Digital Learning website. The address is at the bottom of the screen.